Hello and welcome to Roundtable. A peace agreement in Northern Ireland was signed nearly a quarter of a century ago, and yet suddenly it all seems so fragile. Two things in particular are changing the political climate. Sinn Fein, which wants the North and South united again, is now the biggest party in the North's Assembly. And Boris Johnson, under pressure from the other side, the Unionists, looks increasingly likely to scrap a deal with the European Union over trade between North and South. Only if what's called the protocol is ditched, say Unionists, will they consider a pact with Sinn Fein and agree to form a government. Complicated, yes. Potentially dangerous too. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. British ministers insist that Sinn Féin's election victory does not signal the possible breakup of the United Kingdom, despite the Nationalist Party's push for a referendum on a united Ireland within the next 5 years. Let us not forget, too, that Ireland itself, a member of the European Union, is desperate to avoid a rise in tensions between the two communities, both north and south of the border. However, with the Democratic Unionist Party refusing to form a government with Sinn Féin, unless and until the Northern Ireland Protocol issues are resolved, is the prospect of a united Ireland actually on the cards? Very pleased to say that we can welcome to this roundtable out of Belfast, Peter McLoughlin, Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Relations at Queen's University in the city, to Dublin, and Rory Montgomery, former Irish ambassador to the European Union and France, a member of the Irish team that put together the peace deal, the Good Friday Agreement, and in Dublin, Harry McGee, political correspondent with the Irish Times. Peter, simply because you happen to be in the north, you get the short straw, and give us a simplified version of what is the protocol and why it's causing so much division.
It's quite complex to explain, and probably the best way to do is go back over recent history, which is annoying for some people, but to remember what Brexit was about. Okay, so the UK leaving the EU, and one of the fundamental problems with that is that it would continue to have a land border with part of the EU, that is the Republic of Ireland. So because of the Irish border, there was going to be potentially a customs border there in the countryside in Ireland. That created problems for the Good Friday Agreement. If you had customs checks and other sorts of checks which created a meaningful political border on the island of Ireland, it would be offensive to nationalist opinion, but it would also undermine the basic idea of the Good Friday Agreement, that the border no longer had relevance, didn't stop anyone from their daily activities. Some people have farms that cross the border, or that they cross the border on a daily basis for work or education. So that was a fundamental problem with Brexit, and the protocol was the solution, which was to say, instead of having a customs border on the island of Islands, that there would be one in the Irish Sea. So in effect now we have checks on goods coming in from Great Britain, from the rest of the United Kingdom into Northern Ireland. So that would seem a sensible, practical solution, because there's far less toing and froing like there would be on a daily basis across the Irish border. However, it creates lots of political problems, particularly for unionists, just as an Irish border would be a problem for nationalists. The idea for unionists that they're being separated from Great Britain, aligned with the Republic of Ireland, makes them feel this is undermining the union and putting them in a kind of on a course to unify with the Irish Republic. So you can see it's politically destabilising for them, and that explains why the DUP now is saying it won't go into government unless the protocol is changed.
Thank you very much. Much better than I could have done it. Much appreciated. Let me come to you, Rory Montgomery, former ambassador. You know the ins and outs of the European Union, and you were there when they were putting together the Good Friday Agreement. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think that something like this would ever exist and cause such a problem for peace in Ireland?
Well, certainly not when we were putting the agreement together in 1998. There was absolutely no question but that the UK and Ireland would both remain members of the European Union. And for that reason, there's almost nothing said in the agreement about this, because, as I say, it was taken for granted. Now, it was 2013, when I was still in Brussels, that David Cameron first started talking about a referendum. first said there would be a referendum if the Conservatives won the election, which they did. But as I say, it's now almost 6 years since the Brexit referendum. And while we knew it would be complex and difficult, I don't think anybody thought that the Northern Ireland question would still be rumbling on like this.
And do you think that this brings together, what does it bring closer the possibility of a referendum on the future reunification of the island of Ireland?
I'm not sure that it does. I mean, to have a referendum on the future of the island, the Secretary of State, well, he could choose to call a referendum at any time, but he's obliged to do so if he believes a majority in Northern Ireland would vote in favour of unity, and then there'd have to be a referendum in the Republic as well. But I don't see any signs, frankly, of any major shift in the overall balance of opinion. And it's fair to say that while there are, maybe up to 40% of the population, maybe a little less, who would certainly vote for United Ireland in a referendum, and there may be a similar number, slightly larger number, who would definitely vote to maintain the union, there is a growing middle bloc who want to focus on day-to-day issues and are pretty neutral, I think, on the constitutional question. And if anything, I think Brexit has had the effect of making people aware just how complex disentangling constitutional political arrangements can be. And I think particularly for those in the middle, it might well be a reason to steer clear of it for the time being.
Can we come to the squeezed middle ground, if you like, in just a moment? Harry, let me bring you in. There is such a thing as momentum, though, isn't it? And if you keep banging at a door, perhaps eventually it will open. Are there those, predominantly where you are in the south, who believe that this is a time to take advantage of the opportunity that perhaps the election of Sinn Fein in Northern Ireland has given them?
Well, Sinn Fein clearly believe that there is an advantage in doing that, and have been beating that drum unrelentingly since they did so well in the Assembly elections less than a fortnight ago. We must look at the political makeup in the North at present. Sinn Fein has emerged as the biggest party for the first time ever. So that was a symbolic shift. Now, there were particular reasons why that occurred. Most of the nationalist constituency backed Sinn Fein at the expense of the other nationalist party, the SDLP, and there was a fragmentation in the vote of the Unionist Party. The DUP was outflanked by the traditional Unionist voice on the kind of the extreme side, as it were, and also in this double pincer movement by this new emerging centre ground, personified essentially by the Alliance Party and Naomi Long, which did exceedingly well in the Assembly elections. Within nanoseconds of the result being announced, Mary Lou MacDonald, the leader of Sinn Féin, was talking about her hope that a border poll would be conducted within a period of 5 years. That is happening, I think, within the imagination of Mary Lou MacDonald. I don't think in the real world that there's any possibility that that will happen. But at the same time, as you were saying, when people begin to push against the door, this this particular concept is out there now, and people are beginning to think about it in a way perhaps that they weren't thinking about it 5 years ago.
Which allows me an opportunity to go back in a rather sort of stunted form, very stunted form, over 600 years of Irish Anglo history. Henry VIII, King of England, 1541. He was proclaimed King of Ireland by the Irish Parliament. And then we had 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, the Irish Free State coming into being, partitioning Northern Ireland, which remained part of the UK. 49, Ireland leaves the Commonwealth. And then we have something which is within our living memories, 68 to 98, violent confrontations between mainly Catholic and Protestant communities in the north, and the British Army leaving as many as 3,500 dead, and 1998, the Good Friday Agreement, that peace agreement. Peter, let me come to you. Is there a fear in the north of Ireland that the divisions we're seeing at the moment could lead to frictions, which in turn could lead to a return to some kind of confrontation between the various communities, and that in turn could lead to a breakdown in community relations?
I don't think there's a fear that there's such a fundamental return to what there was before. The situation in Northern Ireland has massively changed in some regards. It's stayed the same in others. It's massively changed in that there is no longer the gross inequality there was. There was a big fuel to the fire of the conflict. So the Good Friday Agreement, the changes that have come out of that have massively changed and equalised the two communities and brought about fundamental human rights and guarantees for everybody. So in that regard, there's that kind of safety net and that basic equality, which means the deprivation and so on, while it's still there, doesn't fuel the conflict in the way it did before, or the divisions that there were before. Where it hasn't changed is that it is still a divided society. It's a very fundamentally divided society. Over 90% of our school children still go to what are effectively segregated schools. And in the city that I'm in now, Belfast is a highly segregated city in terms of its certain neighbourhoods that are overwhelmingly one or the other, Catholic or Protestant. So it is still a problem. There is still that fundamental division between the two communities and beyond Catholic and Protestant, which is not really what it's about. Religion, ethno-national issues, identity and aspirations towards a united Ireland or the United Kingdom, those things still underlie this. But I don't think there's a risk that it would go back to serious conflict. But we've seen last year there were outbreaks of street disturbances. A couple of years before that was loyalists, and a year or so before that we had the tragic killing of Lyra McGee, a young journalist in Derry. So there are instances. The point I would make with those is there are those people who would like to drag it back. And the instability we have now and the problems we have, political difficulties, create space for those people to exploit the situation. So again, I don't think it's a threat of lurching back fundamentally to the past, but it's not good either. We really need to resolve these problems.
So some sort of change is needed, according to a great many people, regards the protocol, etc., etc. Not least the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, who's been in Northern Ireland in the last few days.
Of course, as you know, there's this issue with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And here you've got one of the traditions, one of the communities that does not like the way that it is operating. And in fact, none of the parties, I spoke to all 5 parties just now, not one of them likes the way it's operating. They all think it can be reformed and improved, from Sinn Fein to SDLP, DUP, all of them. And the question is, how do you do that? And we would love this to be done in a consensual way with our friends and partners, ironing out the problems, stopping some of these barriers east-west. But to get that done, to have the insurance, we need to proceed with a legislative solution at the same time.
So, Rory Montgomery, is he right when he says none of the parties like the protocol? He's talking about Sinn Fein, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the DUP, the Unionists. Is he playing politics there, which is what he's accused of by Sinn Fein? Or is he right that nobody likes it and therefore it is time for a change?
I think one of the problems which has led to the current situation is that virtually nobody in Northern Ireland has any trust in Boris Johnson, whether they're unionist or nationalist. And I think he says whatever suits him at the relevant moment. It's true that nobody, of course, wants there to be checks and controls on goods traffic between Britain and Northern Ireland. But that is what has emerged as a result of Brexit. And it was the price which has to be paid for maintaining an open border between North and South, as was being explained earlier. So I think it's fair to say that business, who are overwhelmingly, I think, in favour of maintaining the protocol but changing it somewhat, and the majority of parties in Northern Ireland, the majority of people in Northern Ireland, can live with the protocol. Of course, they'd like it, as I say, to be softened here and there. And the European Commission, who are the negotiators with the UK, have made very clear that they stand ready to make changes. There is a more fundamental opposition on the part of the DUP and other unionists, in fairness, but they have turned it into a kind of a totemic issue, which is unfortunate. I think there was an opportunity last autumn when the Commission came forward with interesting and imaginative proposals. There was scope for the British to have claimed a kind of a victory and have engaged in a serious negotiation. That hasn't happened. Let's hope it can happen in the period ahead.
OK, Harry, let me come to you. Is there an appetite in the South to encourage the European Union to allow changes to be made to the protocol? And I keep bringing up the protocol because it's fundamental to the formation of a government in Northern Ireland and therefore the premise on which we've based this programme. Is there an appetite from the government in the South to say to the European Union, you have to do this if you want to maintain the strength of the peace agreement? And then my next question to you, well, I'll save that until you've answered this.
Okay, well, I think there is an appetite in the South, and the South have been Southern government has been a very willing participant in the negotiations throughout. Rory referred earlier on to David Cameron first suggesting the prospect of a Brexit referendum in 2013, and here we are almost a decade later, and the issues have not been resolved. I think everything to do with Northern politics, you have to play a long game. It took 13 years between the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985 and the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Even after the Good Friday Agreement, it really took 7 years for all the issues that were unresolved by that agreement to be ironed out. Decommissioning of IRA material in particular. This is also turning out to be a long game. The argument that has been made by the Irish government is that the EU have bent over backwards in order to facilitate British concerns in relation to the operation of the protocol. And the sense that the Irish government has had, I think Rory articulated there a few minutes ago, is that Boris Johnson changes his tune at every available opportunity. He arrived into the north this week and spoke to all the party leaders. To me, there seemed to be a lot of chicanery and bombast and a typical Boris Johnson anecdote. We talked about meeting the chief rabbi, and he was saying he was having difficulty getting kosher meat into Northern Ireland, thus signifying the dissatisfaction of all the communities in the north. And you have to kind of parse those comments to see whether they stand up to
Rory
scrutiny
also
or
said
not.
that this was a price that Britain had to pay for leaving the European Union, as if it were, and Rory, you may come back on this, as if it were a kind of punishment.
No, absolutely not a punishment, far from it, but it's simply a logical consequence that there are three essential parts to the equation. One is that Britain chose to leave the European Union, and in a hard way, leaving the customs union and leaving the single market. And the Brexit pursued by Boris Johnson in the end was a tougher version than Theresa May had negotiated earlier. Secondly, there's the objective of avoiding any new checks or controls between North and South for the reasons explained earlier. And thirdly, the question of protecting the EU's single market. In other words, the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic is now a border between the EU and a country outside the EU, the UK. So therefore, there is a need for some control of goods coming in from Northern Ireland in case, if you like, they leak through into the single market. So it's not a punishment.
But my point really is, if the European Union were in the slightest bit worried about this bringing further instability to Northern Ireland, would it not go out of its way to make sure that there were concessions that allowed the formation of a government in the north?
My point, I think, as Harry has said as well, I mean, I think the Europe, and as I said earlier, the European Commission has in many ways proposed alterations to the functioning of the protocol, which would make it less onerous. And I have no doubt that the European Union is willing to go a bit further if it feels that it has a partner negotiating in good faith. And then, just as Harry would have said, the Irish government, I think, behind the scenes would have been very strong in urging the EU to move as far as it can. But there are limits, I think, beyond which it practically can't. That's part of the problem. And of course, everybody wants to see an executive reformed. But the trouble is that it's simply not a feasible matter to give the British government or the Unionists all that they're asking for. Let's remember, as I say, that a majority of the parties in Northern Ireland, representing a majority of the people, want the protocol to function. And as I say, you have to bring the Unionists on board. Of course you do, which is why it'll be a tortuous process. But sooner or later, if this is to work, the British government is going to have to say, we have achieved a great deal in our negotiations, and we now recommend this deal to you, the Unionists, and please move ahead.
Okay. I can see that, and it's coming to a head, it appears, very quickly. Harry, let me come back to you. And Peter, I'm not ignoring you, but I want to follow up on something I was going to say to Harry anyway, which is when you see Sinn Fein saying, listen, we would like to see a referendum within 5 years, what is the view on that potential Pandora's box regarding reunification of the government in the south? Does it see it as a realistic possibility? Does it see it as something that needs to be snuffed out, or is it something that eventually should be encouraged?
I think it's not a realistic possibility at this moment in time, but it has become part of the conversation. If you go back maybe 3 or 4 years, the prospect of United Ireland wasn't even really being talked about in any serious manner. Sinn Fein have made great strides electorally in the south, and now look like they could be the lead government, the lead party in the next government. And if it is, this will be their priority, and this is something that they will press unrelentingly, as you said, if they keep on pushing at that particular door. But looking at it, Rory, I think, described, and Peter described earlier, the demographics. And the demographics, I think, are really against them. I don't know what appetite there is in the South for a united Ireland. And if there is, I think it will take a long time for it to manifest itself. Similarly, in the North, even though the nationalist population in the North, as a proportion of the overall population, has increased, I think that the growth of the centre ground will dilute the desire of those who would have classed themselves as nationalists for a united Ireland. So I think it's a problematic proposition on both sides of the border.
The centre ground. Let's get back to it. We did promise that we would, but first I'm going to play in a clip from Mary Lou McDonald. This was during Boris Johnson's trip to the north.
It's very clear to us that despite all of the rhetoric from the British government about re-establishing the executive here in the north, that in fact their priority is placating the DUP. We've had what we would describe as a fairly tough meeting with the Prime Minister. We have put it to him very directly that the absolute priority is about getting government working here in the north. People are facing incredible difficulties in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and it's simply not acceptable. It's not good enough for anybody, the DUP or the British government, to hold society here to ransom. We have said directly to him that the proposed unilateral act of legislating at Westminster is wrong.
Peter, my question to you is that she says they're playing politics, that they're trying to placate the Democratic Unionist Party. But if we get back to the middle ground, is there a place in Irish politics for the DUP and Sinn Fein perhaps to be slightly marginalised when it comes to this, and the general public, the middle ground that's been referred to on a number of occasions on this programme, to be able to say, get on with it, sort it out?
I think pressure like that will increase, although at the moment it will be increased more on the DUP. The DUP is seen to be the one holding up government, and Sinn Fein is in a strong position now to be able to argue that and to stress, the cost of living, the fact that we have the worst waiting lists in Europe in terms of our health crisis. So there'll be a lot of pressure on the DUP to shift. I wouldn't overstate this idea of the middle ground. It is significant, it is growing, and we've seen that with the Alliance. But a couple of things I would say about that. First of all, the Alliance did take votes off a lot of other moderate parties, so the moderate UUP and SDLP, and also the Green Party lost 2 of its seats. So it seemed to be really kind of mopping up that middle ground. It did grow, I'm not suggesting otherwise, but more consolidating and becoming the key party in the centre ground. But what I would also stress is that there wasn't a significant diminishing of either the overall unionist vote or the overall nationalist vote. So yes, the DUP vote went down, but the TUV, that is the much more hardline Unionist Party, got a lot of its votes. So you can still see those two blocks of traditional, what some people would call sectarian blocks, still exist and are still very important.
This is the interesting point, isn't it? If there is a growing middle ground, and if it ends up reducing the polarisation of politics in both North and South, is that more or less likely to lead to more talk about reunification? What do you think, Peter?
It's very hard to know because the middle ground are more interested in lots of different issues. And what it will be is if I agree with what's already been said, that the overall debate on the future of this island is increasing north and south. There's no two ways about that. But what people in the middle will want to know about, the Alliance voters, for example, will be, what's this going to mean for LGBT rights and women's rights? And we've seen there's been real problems with that in Northern Ireland. There's been huge advances in the Republic of Ireland. So there could be a case there for someone who's a feminist or who believes just in fundamental equality, thinks that the Republic of Ireland, as opposed to post-Brexit United Kingdom, is a much more liberal society. Similarly with the environmental debate, young people who want to know, is a United Ireland good? Is it going to help us decarbonise the economy quicker than a United Kingdom led currently by the Tories?
Yeah.
So I can see how the constitutional debate could evolve, But it's not all about Sinn Fein or the traditional idea of a united Ireland. Is this pragmatic? Is there going to be a good health service? Is there going to be better environmental standards, etc.?
I gave Peter the short straw at the beginning of the programme, the protocol in 35 seconds. I'm going to give you the future of Ireland, Rory, if I may, in 15 to 20 seconds. In our lifetime, are we going to see a united Ireland?
I don't think it'll happen in the next 15 to 20 years, but I wouldn't rule it out. And as others have said, the situation has changed and evolved. The South is totally different from what it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It's a more attractive partner for Northern Ireland than it was. Northern Ireland is changing too. But overall, I think there will be a reluctance on the part of many to embark on what will be a very long and complicated and possibly difficult path.
It might take up people's entire lifetimes, as it has done over the course of the last few centuries. Who would want that? Listen, thank you all very, very much indeed. Great to see you, Peter. Rory, thank you very much indeed. And Harry, great to have you out of Dublin. Thank you, wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.